And I'm here just to introduce you. It's not the formal beginning of the summit yet. This is our second side event. So I am Professor Bohler-Muller, Head of Delegation. A lot of friends in the room. I have some welcomes to make. Excuse me, bit of feedback there. And you know, there's always a protocol that we have to stand on for something like this. So I believe that we have two ambassadors in the room with us, Ambassador David Martinon and Ambassador Vicente. Ambassador Martinon is from the French Embassy, and Madame Vicente is from the Angolan Embassy. We also have a representative of our main funder here today, and that is Charlotte Dierkes from GIZ, the German corporation. And of course, the funders of the Care Economy Working Group of W20, the IDRC. I believe that Carolina Rubino is also here with us today. I also want to welcome Neo Mofokeng from UN Women. Nice to see you, Neo. As well as, of course, the co-chair of W20, Dr. Cindy Swe Mzamo. So as I said, today's the second side event. On Friday, we had an absolutely fabulous side event where we spoke about the care economy and the various aspects of the care economy. And this is a kind of an extension of that for lunchtime today. It is a fantastic topic around the care climate nexus, and it's being led by the WITS Southern Center for Inequality. And I want to thank you very much for hosting us today, for being here today, and for allowing us to have lunch together and start off Women 20 with such a big bang. So the director of the WITS Southern Center of Inequality is Professor Imraan Khan, and Professor Imraan Valodia, my apologies. Professor Imraan Valodia, and Imraan will be chairing the session. I also want to welcome the two speakers from the WITS Southern Center for Inequality. That's Sonia Phalatse, who will be making the main presentation, as well as Professor Chevonne Reynolds. We also have the pleasure of having with us the Chief Director of the Department of Electricity and Energy, Elizabeth Marabwa, as well as Lebogang Mulaisi from the Presidential Climate Commission, and Anna Moreno from the Global Alliance of Care, as well as Erin Tansey from the IDRC. I would like to welcome you on stage, please.
Hi everyone. I want to start by kind of really thanking Narnia for making the space for us to have this session today. What we want to share with you is some work that we've been doing kind of over the last kind of 2 years that's been kind of extremely generously supported by the IDRC, and I want to thank the IDRC team who are here. I think the kind of the motivation for this work comes from us kind of having to think through kind of really two intersecting kind of crises that we faced with at the moment. The first is a kind of crisis of care in the way that the that we traditionally think about care. And the second is the climate crisis, and the need for us to adjust the way we run our economies and the way we run our social systems. I think what we've tried to do in this work is to bring those two ideas together and make the case that there's one kind of crisis of care. There's a crisis of care that is linked to the reproduction of ourselves, and there's a kind of crisis of care that is linked to the reproduction of the environment around us. And the work that we've done is to bring these two kind of intersecting kind of crises of care together, kind of in a framework that we're going to share with you, that my colleague Sonia is going to quickly talk you through, and you can pick up this kind of framework kind of outside at the table there. Kind of at the time that we were developing the framework, we kind of had a group of about 20 kind of economists and kind of people kind of who work on care, thinking about this framework and kind of helping us to bring it together. And each one of our team was kind of asked to write a short piece that would link kind of climate change to care, and all of those kind of pieces are in in this book, and you can pick up the book at the end, kind of at the end as well. And I think you'll find that some of the most prominent feminist economists around the world, especially in the global South, have worked really closely with us on this project. So the way we're going to run the afternoon is that Sonia Phalatse, who's a researcher at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies, and who's sort of really done the bulk of the work on this framework, is going to share with us some a quick overview of the framework, and then we're going to have 4 sets of responses to it. The first is by Narnia, who's going to share her thoughts on how this kind of framework might be incorporated into some of the W20 activities. We then have 3 other speakers. Unfortunately, Elizabeth, who's from our Department of Forestry and Environmental Affairs, has had a family issue that she's had to deal with, so she's kind of unable to join us, and she asked me to please pass on her apologies to everyone. We've worked kind of really closely on this framework with some of the climate scientists who have really shared with us some of their thinking around around climate science. And we're really pleased to have Chevonne Reynolds, who's an associate professor in our School of Animal, Plant and Environmental Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand, which is here in Johannesburg. kind of her research systems, and she'll share some of that I'll put to her when we have all of the panelists here. We'll then move on to Lebogang Mulaisi, who's the executive manager responsible for policy and research in the South African presidential climate kind of institution. She's worked in the past for the trade union movement and has been kind of involved in these issues for quite some time. Our final panelist will be Anna Moreno, who's the secretary of the Global Alliance for Care, and kind of has been kind of doing work on these issues for quite some time as well. We'll then close with some thoughts from kind of Erin Tansey from the IDRC. Kind of Erin has over 20 years of experience in the international development kind of development sector. She's worked for a long time in South Africa. I think we kind of think of her as an honorary South African, kind of, and she heads up the kind of IDRC's kind of sustainable and kind of inclusive economies kind of division, and kind of we look forward to her thoughts. So with that, let me then pass it on to Sonia, and we can once Sonia's done, we'll then move to Narnia and then kind of have all of the panelists up here. So Sonia, over to you. Mic's not great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming today and for sharing your Sunday with us. I feel very honored to be here with such an amazing group of people. As Imraan mentioned, I will be sharing work that we at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies have been doing over the past 2 years, essentially looking at the climate crisis through a care lens. And we've been asking ourselves a lot of questions about the connections between care and climate, such as, how could an ethic of care and mutuality help us understand and better respond to the climate crisis? And I think really our project tries to bridge the gap between two very different worlds. So on the one hand, there's amazing work on care that's done by feminist economists that's been done for decades. And then on the other hand, there's this climate science, scientific knowledge that is coming out that's really important for this moment. And so this research has essentially led us to develop what we call the Care Climate Nexus, and it's a conceptual framework that attempts to kind of conceptually make the links between care and climate. So I'll start very simply because I get asked this question a lot about what is care? And I think we all know what it means to care for others. But feminist scholars describe care work as work, as important work that sustains life and encompasses everything that makes our existence, human existence, possible, and also makes it possible for us to actually participate in the labor force in the first place. So things like childcare, cooking, cleaning, collecting water, firewood, etc., caring for the sick, caring for the elderly. But care also extends beyond just human-to-human relationships. It includes environmental care, which is also caring for the environment, caring for our ecosystems, caring for the planet. And much of this care work, whether it's human or environmental, is extremely gendered, and it falls disproportionately on women and girls. And this work is very indispensable, but it remains unpaid, undervalued, and largely invisible in policy making. And hopefully we can change that soon. So in thinking about the links between care and climate, we argue very strongly that care work is foundational to our economies and societies. And the starting point is very obvious. Climate change intensifies the burden of care. So when droughts, floods, and heat waves disrupt access to water and food, etc., the immediate shock absorbers, for lack of a better word, are in households and communities. And in the work that we've been doing across Africa in climate-affected areas, we see that these impacts are not only quantitative in terms of like the number of hours that increases because of climate change, but it's also very much has qualitative effects, right? The work becomes more time-consuming, more emotionally and psychically taxing under, deteriorating environmental conditions. But importantly, I think what we also try to communicate here is that the link between care and climate is very structural, as what Imraan mentioned, that both crises stem really from an economic system that undervalues that which sustains life. And the way that society treats care and nature is very, very similar, right? Society, we treat carers and nature as kind of unending resources to extract from without really replenishing. And because of that, both are reaching a breaking point, a crisis moment. So in recognizing this interdependence, I think it changes and should change how we should understand potential policy options, because it shows that investing in care is also investing in climate resilience, and economies with strong public services, with equitable care systems and strong social protection is far better equipped to withstand and recover from climate shocks. At the same time, tackling the climate crisis through a care lens, I think, pushes us to rethink what we value in our economies, and really calls for us to move away from extractive, growth-driven economic models towards economies that center care for people, for communities, and the planet. And this is, the foundation for what we call this Care Climate Nexus Conceptual Framework, which I will briefly go over. And as Imraan mentioned, you can get the framework outside. So this, you probably aren't able to see all of it, which is fine. The conceptual framework, I think, really what I'm trying to communicate is that it brings together different layers that shape the relationship between climate change and care, and it helps us to see how kind of broad social and economic structures connect to people's everyday experiences, and how the way our economies are organized influences both the climate crisis and care inequalities. So, I mean, this framework it shows the relationship between these three boxes, the orange boxes, which we call the economic and social cultural system, which is made out of two determinants, which are structural and intermediate. The structural determinants are the social, kind of economic and political conditions that shape how both climate change and care are experienced. And so they include things like power and how power is distributed, how decisions about climate solutions are made, how our economies value or undervalue different kinds of work. And the framework shows that the devaluation of care is linked, as I mentioned, to economic systems that are built on kind of overconsumption, extractivists, and an endless drive for growth. And that these systems in turn create and reinforce inequalities across class, gender, race, and geography, etc., that determine who is most exposed to climate risks and who carries the greatest burden of climate change. Right next to that, the structural determinants is the intermediate determinants, which are kind of your immediate drivers of climate impacts, and these include kind of our dependence on fossil fuels, unsustainable patterns of production and consumption, the loss of land, resources, through mining, deforestation, and industrial agriculture. And what we argue is that these determinants lead directly to, you know, rising temperatures, droughts, climate change, and what we essentially attempting to show is that this economic and social cultural system creates direct and indirect effects on our environment, such as displacement, food and water insecurity. And they also impact the demands for care, which, as we know, increases. So I think the framework, I hope, pushes us to think very structural, right? To see that responding to the climate crisis and the care crisis requires a reorientation of our economies and an urgent rethink of what we value. And you know, as we approach the G20 summit, we may have an opportunity to foreground alternative economic models that put care and well-being and ecological sustainability above profit and endless growth. So I was asked to also include some policy recommendations to kind of get us to start thinking about how we could use the Care Climate Nexus tangibly. I don't think I did that well, but I thought maybe if I used the ILO framework, which everybody knows, and is specific to care, and it's about recognizing, reducing, redistributing, representing, and remunerating care. But what I've done is I've made it relevant to this conversation about climate change. So I'll quickly go over that. So the one is making care visible by recognition is foundational. It means acknowledging that care work is essential infrastructure for sustaining life. It's about making care inequalities visible so that they're not inadvertently exacerbated by climate change interventions. It's about recognizing the role of care work in moving to a climate just economy. It's about recognizing the knowledge that carers and the work that they do to enable households to cope in disaster situations and with everyday environmental stresses. Secondly, to reduce care means addressing the increased strain that climate change places on caregivers. So as resources become scarce or access to these resources become unpredictable, the effort required to care intensifies. And so reducing care can be done by investing in time-saving technologies that can simultaneously mitigate climate change and reduce time and effort of care work tasks. We should be reducing the amount of time required to carry out care work by making it more convenient and safe and less physically demanding, by providing social and physical infrastructure that makes care easier to do. Thirdly, we should be redistributing care and sharing the responsibility for care, socializing care work through state policies, services, and facilities. And of course, challenge gender norms that make care work a kind of feminized activity. And then fourth, to represent means to give carers a voice in climate governance, is to give care workers a voice in decision making, to get data that illuminates their lived experiences, their concerns, and seriously takes in their ideas for change. It means including carers in climate action planning so that their care-specific concerns and needs can be embedded from the start. And then finally, to remunerate, which means we should be valuing care work as work. And I think, yeah, remunerating is my favorite R because it challenges the assumption that care is, a free resource, and it recognizes that the unpaid labor that sustains households and communities has economic and ecological value. And so climate finance, I think here is really important. We need to be integrating kind of cash transfers or direct monies to carers and incorporating these schemes in climate finance arrangements. So I will close by returning, I think, to the central idea that I think has guided this work with my team, Julia Taylor and Imraan and others, is that care is not peripheral to climate action and is very much foundational to it, and that this nexus, I think, reminds us that how we care for one another and for the earth determines how resilient our societies can be. And I hope this framework and the reflections I've shared today kind of spark further thinking for us today on how we might design policies that are both caring and sustainable. I'll stop here because I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Great, Sonia. Thank you so much for that. Sonia had a really hard task because this is work that we've done over 2 years, and we kind of allocated her all of 10 minutes to present it. But I think the key point is that we're making the argument that if we really want to do something about climate change, and we really want to do something about the crisis in the care of human beings, that our economic system needs to be evolving to put the idea and kind of the concept of care at the center of how we think about economic relationships, about how we think about how we use resources, about how we think about the reproduction of ourselves and how we think about the reproduction of the environment around us. So we're now going to move to come to the first set of remarks. And Narnia, who I don't have to introduce at length, has kindly agreed to share some thoughts about the framework, and kind of share her ideas about how how this framework might be might be taken forward, in the W20 processes. So over to you, Narnia.
Thank you, Professor Valodia. When I introduced Prof. Valodia earlier, my mind slipped. I'm a big cricket fan, and we had an amazing cricketer a while ago in South Africa called Imraan Khan. So it was still respectful, Prof, I promise. In fact, Prof. Valodia does something far more important than cricket. He was appointed by our President Ramaphosa to serve on the Extraordinary Global Committee on Wealth Inequality under South Africa's G20 presidency. that will be chaired by the Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz. So congratulations, Prof. And thank you so much, Sonia, for, yes, pushing everything that you've done for 2 years into 10 minutes. It is very inspirational, the work that is being done here, because not much is being said or written about the care climate nexus, although it seems quite an obvious thing, because we care for one another and we care for the planet, so people and prosperity, as it was under the Indian G20 presidency, caring for people, caring for the planet. So it's prosperity within the context of something much more important and something bigger. Sustainable prosperity and the ability to begin to value care work within our societies. The reason why this is important for Women 20 is obvious. Women bear the burden of care work within our societies. For some, it may not seem a burden, but it is often invisible, often not seen, and often not paid for. So we are looking at a situation where women do so much for societies but are not recognized for that work in the same way that a CEO would be recognized for running a company. So this revaluing of care work is essential to what we need to do, but not care work in isolation. We have a number of topics that we discuss within W20, and 2 of our task teams are related to this. The one is the care economy task team, and the other one is the climate justice, environment, and food security task team. And we always talk about intersections in what we do. And these intersections are very important in finding new ways of thinking, new ways of developing policies that matter and policies that make a difference in people's lives. So we need to make care visible, Sonia, as you mentioned. And we need to remove the strain on caregivers as a result of climate change and environmental degradation. So we need to take care of one another. We need to take care of the planet. And we need to make sure that women are recognized for the value that they bring to their households, their communities, and society. And so in our communique, W20 communique that we will be releasing on the 14th of October in our closing plenary at the summit, we will be making some recommendations around the importance of the care economy and climate justice, and we're hoping that the leaders have the ears to listen to us. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. So can I request our 3 panelists to kind of join us, please? Great. So we've kind of asked our 3 panelists to share some thoughts kind of about this framework and and the importance of care when we're thinking about climate change. So I'm going to start with Chevonne, Reynolds. So Chevonne's a kind of a climate scientist who works at Wits University. Her original interest used to be in birds, and she's a one of South Africa's really prominent academic ornithologists. But since she bumped into us, we've kind of converted her into a feminist economist. But Chevonne, I wanted to ask you a question that really focuses on the kind of on the ecological science kind of this, kind of because I think that's the perspective that you bring. So the question is how do you see the care climate nexus kind of shaping the way we understand environmental challenges and solutions? And from a science perspective, why would you say that this kind of care climate nexus framework is kind of important to the science of climate change? So over to you, Chevonne. I think the buzz might come because we have two mics on. I'm going to turn mine off and see if that helps.
Good afternoon. Okay, all right, you can hear. All right, thank you. Thank you, Imraan. Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Julia, for my conversion to from scientist to feminist economist. No, all jokes aside, I think in addressing this question, me being here as a scientist and an ecologist talking about a framework from feminist economics really speaks volumes about the value of the work that has been done in terms around our thinking around climate change and what we're going to do. Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay. Okay, only one. Right, we're working. Okay, where was I? Okay, so what I really think is important about this framework is it pushes us to think outside of our domains. And as I said, as a scientist talking about a feminist economics framework, I think I'm a living testament to what we can achieve by listening to each other, stepping out of our domains, and really thinking about working truly interdisciplinary and in some ways transdisciplinary. I think that the Care Climate Nexus and the framework that the SCIS team has put together is really important because it does a really good job of explaining the human-nature relationships, and especially those relational values that the scientific frameworks really struggle to encapsulate. And when I share ideas from care economics with scientists working on IPBES or IPPC, they get really excited about this idea because it really does an incredible job, a holistic job of representing what it means to have a relationship with nature. And I think this is an important starting point for science and for thinking about climate change. So I just want to reflect a little bit on my journey and how I got here and why I think, why I'm so excited about the future, really. And I saw this work presented by Sonia at our interdisciplinary climate change symposium at WITS, and it really immediately gripped me from a theoretical perspective. So as a biologist, I'd never really experienced this idea of care or care for nature. And the framework was being so explicit about how care for nature is a form of care work. And so this conservation work, this ecological stewardship, this volunteering that we do on a daily basis is also often unrecognized, invisible, and also my favorite R, unremunerated. And so those parallels were just so striking to me. And I immediately reached out to the team thinking, here's an absolute opportunity to collaborate and to bring this kind of thinking into the ecological, the biological, and the climate change realms, where we do have frameworks that value nature, and we've got payments for ecosystem services, and we've got carbon credits. But in many ways, my critique of some of these systems is that they still think about nature as a commodity. They still think about, well, what is nature's value to us? Whereas a care lens really helps us see nature as it has intrinsic value and what we need to do to protect nature. And so I thought it really offered us a new framework in ecology and in climate science for moving forward the valuation of nature and for protecting it. So over the last year, I've been working with this team a little bit, and whilst it's really theoretically interesting and theoretically important, I also think new things have emerged for me over the course of the year and the discussions that I've had with Junior, Imraan, and Sonia. And when we think about environmental challenges, we often think about like climate change, biodiversity loss, land conversion, invasive species. We think about them as separate and sometimes interrelated. And then we think about the actors who are doing those things. And then often our solutions, our policies are then centered around, well, are punitive, right? And they're centered around, well, how do we regulate? How do we tell people to stop doing this? And what occurred to me through thinking about this framework is that it really does an excellent job of saying all of these issues, all of our environmental problems actually stem from the same systemic issue, and that is the undervaluation of care. And why that's important, I think, is that it shifts us from these punitive responses, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have them, we should, but it also opens up a new set of solutions, and a solution that's centered around centering care contexts, and not just in social contexts and economic contexts, but in climate policy and environmental policy at large. And I think if we can change that incentive structure, I think we can go a long way. There's a thinking in environmental sciences around earth optimism, and this idea that people want that if we bombard people with the negative, they lose the sense of hope and the sense that they can actually make change. But if we flip that and we show people that these small interventions, these small little things that we're doing on a daily basis can have impact, we can instill a sense of hope and we can push forward more productive solutions. And I think that's what care actually does. It takes what we're doing on a daily basis, it recognizes it, it values it, and it allows people to feel a sense of hope, a sense of agency around what they're already doing in terms of combating climate change and protecting the environment. And just one of the things I want to highlight is that I think this is very important in an African context. And I spend a lot of time mapping nature. And when we look at the African continent, we see that nearly 70% of this continent is covered with near-natural, largely untransformed lands. And these lands have important biodiversity potential, they have important carbon capture potential, and they're going to be massively important as we face ongoing climate change. And these areas are kept near natural, not despite of people, but because of people. And what we cannot continue to do is ask people to maintain these ecosystems and keep them untransformed and not provide solutions and opportunities to value the work, the labor, the effort, the knowledge, the energy that goes into protecting those ecosystems into the future. And so that's where I think the framework really helps us think about our challenges and our solutions a bit differently. From a science perspective, I love a framework. As an ecologist, I love a systems diagram, and Sonia took one of probably the most complicated systems, most complex systems, and distilled it into a really wonderful set of boxes and arrows. And I know that sounds so trivial, but boxes and arrows are the root for understanding mechanism, and they're the root for understanding levers and feedbacks. And so having that all in place where we can think about what are the relationships between people, nature, climate, are these direct effects, are these indirect effects? How does this change as we move between contexts? So having a framework that allows us to systematically think through all these different mechanisms, but it still allows us to be contextual about each of our specific contexts, because we know that context is important. And so I think that this is a wonderful starting point for climate scientists to better engage with the human dimensions of the climate crisis, to really encapsulate those relational values that we really struggle to grapple with. And we might do them fairly superficially often in science. And to think about the feedbacks and what are the big levers that we need to pull in order to better protect our planet, to combat climate change, and to make sure that we have a sustainable home for both human and non-human life moving forward. Thank you.
Great. So let's then move from the science to the policy side of these of these issues. So for the non-South Africans in the room, one of the things that South Africa's been something of a of an innovator in is that we've set up a national institution that is headed up by by the South African president, that brings together all of the different parts of our society to work through how we're going to change from the economy that we have now to one that would allow us to meet our commitments to net zero. And that institution is known as the Presidential Climate Commission, the PCC, and the executive head of policy and research at the PCC is Lebogang Mulaisi. Lebo used to work, before she joined the PCC, with the trade union movement and was centrally involved in their thinking and their evolution around how we deal with climate change. So, Lebo, I wonder if you could share some thoughts about how you think the Care Climate Nexus could shape policy on climate change, both in South Africa but also in Africa. And perhaps you could also share some of your thoughts on what are the main challenges that you see with the use of this framework. So over to you, Lebo.
Thank you very much, Imraan, and thank you to SEIS for the invitation to come and give my reflections on a very important and undervalued concept in the climate discourse. So, like Imraan said, I previously used to work in the trade unions, and for us, at the time, we were trying to embed sort of like eco-socialism within, the just transition discussion. And I mean, I'm just reflecting right now, and I'm like, the feminist eco-socialism sort of like discourse that we wanted to embed is kind of like unfinished business for me. So being in these discussions is kind of like how we pick up on that work. And just to say that SEIS is actually doing something quite groundbreaking in terms of like thinking about the care and climate nexus, because everybody else is chasing like climate and trade, international trade, quite specifically like green industrialization and all the other things that come with climate, and then we kind of like overlook these. One, because we feel that there's, let me not just say we, but there's a feeling in general that because of its complexity as well, there's a sort of tendency to move away from like addressing the climate and care nexus. So Sonia, Julia, as well as Imraan, and just the broader SEIS team, the framework that was developed to kind of explain a very complex sort of topic and like simplifying it down to our level as policymakers and as an economist, because again, we think in like arrows and diagrams and stuff. It also makes it easier for us to apply in terms of the other more broader policy work that, you know, we do, even at the level of the Presidential Climate Commission. So I also had the privilege of being there when you were launching this report and sort of here today. So I've also had time to kind of think about a couple of things. So I was asked to, you know, kind of think about how the care and climate nexus, you know, shapes policy for South Africa and broadly Africa. And maybe the first thing could definitely be around, you know, redefining how we think about resilience and adaptation in practice. So traditionally, when we think about, you know, adaptation planning, it's often focused on like infrastructure, the way that we build our dams, as well as early warning systems and a number of other like adaptation and resilience building initiatives. These are vital, but resilience also depends on the strength of our social systems. So, for example, healthcare, education, childcare, and community care are quite vital. So, building the climate and care nexus into our adaptation strategies is a quick win for policy makers, and at its core, it builds social resilience, which at its core benefits communities and people more broadly. Given that, you know, South Africa's transition to a low carbon economy is more transformational as opposed to just an energy transition in nature, this becomes really important because the effects can be felt by people on the ground. So really, you know, the importance here is that, you know, your framework, Sonia, could be really important to build that type of climate resilience that focused on community-based care networks. Second, it could influence how we define green and decent work, right? So green transitions tend to emphasize sectors like renewable energy, transport, as well as agriculture. Yet the care economy is inherently low emissions, labor intensive, and locally rooted. So by recognizing the care economy as part of a green economy, South Africa and Africa more broadly can create a plethora of jobs in a low carbon, high impact sort of arena, particularly for women as well as the youth. So in South Africa's just transition planning, you know, this could mean linking our public employment programs, such as the Presidential Employment Stimulus, to community care and climate adaptation efforts, expanding what we traditionally know as green jobs, which is vitally important again in our context. Thirdly, the nexus can deepen the social justice dimension of our climate policy, which again is an important part of the South Africa transition towards a low carbon economy. As indicated earlier on in the discussion, climate impacts, they're not gender neutral, right? So with increased droughts and flooding and heat stress, this has a disproportionate impact on women who are already shouldering a large share of unpaid work in our societies. So incorporating the care and climate nexus help us ensure that policies actively reduce gender inequalities rather than reinforce them, which is vitally important in the South African context. Imraan and myself are from Paris, and we were in a conference that looked at how climate policies can help us address inequality. And one of the things that I picked up in that conference was around, you know, how within carbon pricing, so for example, carbon taxes, how we could look at ring-fencing funding specifically for social security, at a national level, and you know the kind of discussion around how we can look at bringing on board care credits through the ring fencing of social security mechanisms as a result of raising revenue through carbon taxes emerged as something that's quite innovative to help sort of shape that discussion. I quickly want to look at what the challenges have been, and these ones are actually no-brainers, but they sit at the core of why the care work sort of discourse has been difficult to address in previous years. So there's firstly a framing challenge that we are currently facing. So most climate and economic policies, they favor growth, industrialization, as well as mitigation strategies in order to reduce emissions. Whereas care work is now seen as a social issue and a welfare cost. So that makes it difficult. It makes it difficult to integrate it in our care climate work. So really the conversation has to be, how do we put care economy as a strategic investment as opposed to a welfare cost? The second, again, is around measurement issues as well as visibility challenges. Unpaid care work, mostly done by women, remains very invisible in GDP, climate finance tracking, as well as in transition planning more broadly. So when we track where climate finance is going, I'll tell you for free, you will never see whether this is going, the recipients are women or not. We're not tracking this at all. And this is clearly a glaring gap, because I mean, you can't measure things that you're not tracking. And then again, there's always the issue related to the financing challenge. So climate finance, both domestically and internationally, flows mainly towards like your physical infrastructure and technology programs, largely to reduce emissions. So it's very difficult to redirect this funding towards even adaptation. Adaptation falls drastically below mitigation. Whereas redirecting even a small portion of funding towards sort of health systems, water and sanitation, or community-based care would yield enormous benefits for society, but particularly at the community level. I think I'm going to leave it here. Sorry, I've got more, but I'll leave it here.
Great. So we now want to shift to an international perspective, and kind of Moreno is going to help us with that. So she's the kind of secretary of the kind of the Global Alliance on Care. She's a social anthropologist who has worked in, among others, Malaysia, in Singapore, Thailand, and Spain, and mainly on on issues of care. So, Anna, from a global perspective, can you share with us your thoughts on kind of how useful this approach could be globally, and kind of how you think it might be possible to integrate the kind of care, the care climate nexus idea into policies around the world?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hello to everyone. Thank you to you, Imraan, and Sonia, and all the team to put together this panel that we really appreciate. And I'm representing the Secretariat of the Global Alliance for Care, but I always spend the first minutes to say that it's not the Secretariat doing the job, but some of the members really leading it. And in this case, in the Alliance is a consortium, the Care and Climate Initiative with IDRC, with Abina, with Oxfam, with UNRIST, in which university is really working hard together with the University of San Martin. So they are the real leaders of this intersection in the Global Alliance for Care. Obviously, there are other members. We are more than 300, but they are the ones that last year started to say, well, this is time to bring the intersections. Since the Alliance, we approved the strategic framework and strategic priorities for 2025, 2030, and there was, among our members in the participatory process, a clear demand on focusing on the intersections. And obviously, care and climate was one of them, and the other one was care and migration, but there were many others. But members were claiming, please, let's give visibility. Let's use the multi-stakeholder platform to give visibility, more research, more evidence, more advocacy at the global level to the intersections, because that is obviously needed. Obviously, the Alliance is coming from a feminist transformative vision in which care is recognized as work, as need, as right, as public good, as an investment, not as a cost. And obviously we see the care crisis and the climate crisis from the perspective of the women. So it's not, so we obviously see, first of all, how undervalued and under-recognized, and it has been said, but also how climate crisis, it's increasing even the overburden of some work especially unpaid work for women. So this is the kind of conversation that we are really looking for and trying to put in place back to back with multilateral spaces, so that Sonia was mentioning in the 5 adapted version of the 5 R's, that first of all, we need to embed the climate care nexus more deeply in the global climate discussions, especially from the global south perspective. So that is kind of the first, if you want to say, mandate of the care and climate framework that you have developed and you have recognized it, and in fact you have a beautiful page in your framework at the end in which you are given recommendations about how to move forward with the care and climate nexus advocacy. But for us, this is the kind of spaces in which we would like to join efforts. We have seen some advancements at the global level in the recognition of that intersection, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. And as Mabel will say, it's not something that comes just spontaneously in the last 2 years. It comes from before, obviously. A lot of feminist economists bringing that to the table, more environmental economists coming to the table. But I would really like to highlight perhaps the work at the regional conference of women of Latin America and the Caribbean. First, the commitment in Buenos Aires in 2022, that was the first one that recognized the urgency of the climate crisis and the intersection. And then we had this August in Mexico City, 3 years later, because the Regional Conference of Women of Latin America and the Caribbean is every 3 years. We had another commitment building on the successes and achievements of the Buenos Aires one, in which what we call Tlatelolco commitment, in which again, climate and care has a specific mention, recognition, commitment from governments of Latin America and stakeholders that are behind the preparatory process of that document. So in that sense, I would like to say that we have seen some global advancements, though it's regional. But obviously, I will not repeat that there is a lot of work to do in terms of the climate agenda. No? In that sense, UN Women, NEO is here. They have been publishing how national climate strategies are starting to integrate gender and social protection dimensions. No? They have a beautiful working paper on that you can consult. But there is much more needed to be done. In adaptation, it has been said, loss and damage, we mentioned it in some of the workshop, as I said, especially from the south. And then, obviously, if care is framed explicitly in the global norms and frameworks, it will also help national policies to follow. No? And this is why we advocate for the inclusion of care in the NDCs or in the climate adaptation plans or in the loss and damage frameworks or in the global climate funds or in the climate negotiations. You know, it's at that basis. I mean, we need to build at the different levels. No? Then obviously the climate finance, I don't want to, because we could speak for long, I don't want to go there, but a lot needed to be done. Some countries are also working on strengthening institutional coherence. And in fact, Valentina Perrota here from Uruguay, we were together on Friday in a workshop that Narnia was mentioning, and she was mentioning their interministerial coordination mechanism in terms of care, economic care systems, and how they have integrated the Ministry of Environment lately. And I think that's another good experience, a good best practice to keep at least advising national governments, if it's not at the global level, that they can obviously put in place this institutional coherence through interministerial coordination mechanism. No? Then I will not I'm just giving some reflections because the topic we can speak forever, but I would like not to forget about local governments and municipalities and how they are accelerating some of the implementation of the Care and Climate Nexus, even without knowing it. And that's dangerous also, because it could be that they're replicating inequalities without understanding that when they put in place a local climate plan, is not always taking into consideration the care system there, and obviously it's provoking more challenges for women. So I think I would like to mention local governments, and then I would also like to explain, or at least to mention that there are some solutions at the pilot projects happening, no? And piloting integrated care and climate interventions, it's something important for us in terms of bringing at the global level some evidence, no? If you remember, some people started to work with the clean cooking initiatives at the grassroots communities, and they have shown the way to some others. And then the Climate and Care Initiative are also working with grassroots organizations to bring that evidence about the nexus. So I think it's important to understand this piloting. And then perhaps my last two comments, I would like to mention the importance of two things. One is the local and indigenous knowledge. And how we should value it and integrate it also when we talk about the Care and Climate Nexus. And the other one is something that in your framework you are really clear about this, and I really like it, is that we cannot look for solution for the same solution for all contexts, even not regionally. It's not the same the small island context for women and for climate, even if they are in the same region, than the landlocked country. It's not the same a river city that a landlocked city without river, or a coastal. So I think we should increase that complexity, and I like a lot that you have integrated into the framework of there is, the invisible, visible, but please let's not only look for regional solutions. Asia, Africa, and Latin America, for sure, we need the political will, we need the political agreements, but let's work also in other dimensions in which geography is different. Environmental geography is different. Care geography in that sense is different. So I will also like to mention that. And I think I will stop here because I can also talk for long. But my only comment to finalize is in the last, so I was mentioning about Latin America, but also the Global South. Having had G20 in Brazil last year and COP30 in Brazil this year, having G20 in South Africa this year is helping us a lot to discuss about this care and climate nexus and other intersections. So thank you so much. And I would like to have a call to action that we keep pushing for those two spaces to really integrate the care and climate nexus. Thank you so much.
Right, so thank you to Sonia and all three of our panelists, and also to Narnia for sharing their thoughts with us. So we do have some time for any questions from the floor or any thoughts anyone would like to share. There's a kind of a roving mic. So,
my name is Ann. My name is Ann Simmons-Benton. Thank you very much for this rich conversation. It really reminds me, in an academic setting, of the wicked problems. So, I really love the conversation. But is there something, when we look at this wicked problem, that we've left out? Is there something, if we were going to get someone else to talk about it, another subject? I know you wanted to didn't want trade and some of that other stuff. I'm a trade person, so I had to start thinking about that. But that really wasn't what caused me to ask the question, because we are having such a hard time getting to the solution. And so if we have all the right players or all the right questions. So anyway, it's a question to you.
Great. Anyone else? Let's take at the back there. Kind of anyone else? We can probably take one more.
Yes, hello, thank you very much for your interventions. My name is Anami. I am the chair of Talawa, who's hosting an event with the NRF on the 15th. My question for the panel is, I'm just wondering to what extent in the conversations that are being had, to what extent people are discussing the potential here, even as we talk about properly measuring and valuing the work that people do in care as it relates to the climate, and otherwise, whether there is a conversation being had about how there is the risk of reproducing cycles of oppression, cycles of the ghettoization of women, particularly black women and women from the South, but we're in Africa, so sub-Saharan women, in fields that they don't want to work in, and that they're only doing out of necessity. And even if we end up in a situation where they are being paid something for the work, it's not the work that they chose for themselves. And I'm wondering, maybe to take it a step further, if there is a conversation about how, adding the word green to something, so green job, doesn't all of a sudden turn it into some prize for these women. Thank you.
Right. Thokozile here, and then we'll go to you next. All right.
Thank you so much for a really rich session. My name is Thokozile Madonko, and I'm taking liberties because I'm with the SCIS team. So one of the questions I have, I don't know if it can be answered here necessarily, but at least a thought or provocation, is that we kind of, and it's a little bit in the framework, we skirt around this question of economy. And much of our conversation is about trying to get recognized within economic thinking that is so determined to not recognize care and not to recognize, sort of to be uncaring for the planet as well. And so in a context where we see globally and in South Africa a doubling down on austerity or fiscal consolidation, how do we have these conversations when there is this policy of shrinking the state as opposed to expanding the state or public services?
Okay. All right, over to you.
Hi, my name is Amrina Jao, and I'm with IDRC. And my question is for Chevonne. Often we're having these conversations about care in spaces like this with gender advocates, feminist activists, folks who are the converted. How do you talk about this to your colleagues? Other scientists, how do we bring this message to folks who are not necessarily always in the same spaces as us, but really, really need to integrate this into their perspectives?
Great. So let me then pass it on to the panelists. You can choose to deal with any question you want to. Let's start with you, Lebo, and we can go.
As I'm busy writing down my notes. Because it takes time for me to think about these things. So if I didn't address your comment, please forgive me. So the question around how do we not replicate, previous cycles of injustice in this new transition is probably the age-old question that those of us who are working in this transition are staying up at night trying to kind of think about how we don't do that. Because at the heart of climate degradation is a capitalist crisis. Capitalism is at the heart of it, and capitalism exploits three things: women's unpaid care work, the environment, as well as labor. So yes, we want green industrialization, but do I want to replicate these things towards green industrialization? I don't want to. So these are the things that I've been thinking about. So when we were approached by one very interesting PhD student who was looking at through the JETP financing, why we hadn't considered care credits as part of the JETP funding for women who want to be at home and take care of their children. That sort of shocked me, because as a trade unionist, I'm thinking about energy, the economy, jobs. So that, even though I'm a woman myself, that had not crossed my mind. So there are things that we can do that can make sure that in this transition we are not replicating past injustices, because there are women who, especially in sort of regions, so for carbon intensive sectors in South Africa are very much regionally bound. So in women who are in those regions, if they want to continue staying at work and taking care of those children within, and as our compensation, because for those of us who are planning this decarbonization trajectory, we are very much enforcing some of these things on people who don't really have a say. So as part of a compensation mechanism, we should really be thinking about care credits. The question around fiscal consolidation and austerity. It's an important question, right? And it's about how we think about, financing of the transition more broadly, and just the global finance architecture of our transition. And there's been a lot of talk around, how a lot of it, we need to really think about crowding in public investment around our transition, because there are locally specific characteristics of our transition, and just this idea around funding care and not looking at it as a social cost, but rather as an important infrastructure of our transition is probably a lot more work that we still need to do, and what this framework helps us to kind of get that conversation going. But the conversation can't be specific to these types of meetings. I love W20, and I love that we're all together and having these conversations, but they also need to find themselves all the way in the sustainable financing sort of discussion of the G20. They need to find themselves in the Just Energy Transition Working Group transition. So for those people who are very important, who actually get to the point where there is coordination with the various other chairs, this is the coordination that has to happen. The energy minister has to understand at a social development level what this transition is going to mean. So at a first glance, that's my response. Imraan, if you invite me for the second time, I'll kind of have thought about things more and refine my response.
Thank you so much. I will try not to then answer those ones, perhaps just to touch base a bit on Anne's question about who are we missing or what are we missing. And I'm again going perhaps to list things and not going deeper on some of them, but first of all, more intersections, because rural women are probably not the same that when we are talking about urban areas, no? So that's something to take into account when we bring the care and climate nexus, and we keep researching and discussing how to implement it into policies. Private sector, technology. So I'm just, doing kind of a shopping list, but each of them is kind of really, something that we should bring to the table. You have mentioned infrastructure investment, how that climate infrastructure is considering the care systems, and not asking the care systems to be resilient. It's on the other way around sometimes, no? Then, to be honest, what we are missing, obviously, is more understanding. Care and environment are at the bottom of our society, but then they are not valued in the discussion. So we need to put them at the center, obviously. And I like the last part that you were mentioning about coordination. You know, it's everything right now. It's about coordination and trying to be really strategic on how we keep putting. And it's something that the environmentalists, they know really well. They have been doing a lot since the 80s, especially, to try to put the topic at the center. But I like the coordination idea. And in fact, with Narnia and with IDRC, we have even been trying to see how Women 20, Labor 20, Business 20, T20, Youth 20 can talk, at least they understand their perspectives. At least they can bring in the future, in the next G20 summits, common perspectives, or they discuss among themselves, but we need to keep that coordination. And it's the same in the ministry, it's the same at the local level. We need to push for at least that they talk to each other. So that I will say that that's also something that we have not mentioned perhaps so strongly, so concretely, but there's some ideas there that we can advance together.
Thank you for the questions. I'm going to try and not repeat what Anna and Lebogang have said. I think to the question of who's missing, not feminist economists. Yeah, I think you probably need the capitalists in the room. And you know, to have a discussion, and even Imraan has posed the questions to me before, well, who pays for all of this and how do we do it? And it's important. So I think that's, you know, first and foremost is making that connection with the dreaded and finding common ground. And like, that's really what it's about, right? Because the system may be evil and have brought us many problems, but I don't think that people are inherently looking to create problems. I think that people are also looking to solve problems. And I think having that discussion about how do we A, do this within the current system, but B, how do we together move towards a new system, I think is going to be incredibly important if we want to take these ideas forward. To the question about ingraining injustice, or just revisiting injustice, or rebranding, it's something I worry about as well. But I think in some ways, currently, it's just not even recognized. You know, women out there, people out there doing this incredible work in supporting, from my perspective, supporting ecosystems on a daily basis. They have like this incredible traditional knowledge, keeping these ecosystems intact, maintaining biodiversity, sequestering carbon, and currently we don't even acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. And I think just first and foremost an acknowledgement that there are millions of people out in Africa doing this work is incredibly important. And how we actually remunerate and what that means for sort of injustice and embedding people within rural systems, I think does need a lot of thought. But we have made these mistakes before. We also continue to make them, and so there's a lot of learning that we can revisit so that we can try not to make those mistakes again. And then the last question was on how do we get people into these spaces, or how do we have this conversation? How do we invite people in? It's a tricky one because I think you have to be open to having a conversation in the first place. And in that space, I actually think that probably your biggest ally is the climate change biodiversity community. We are already looking for solutions to very parallel problems that you're facing in the traditional care space. And I think in some ways, this climate community and the nature community may have potentially made, well, I wouldn't say better, but different inroads around financing that then maybe some of you have. And so I think that's a massive alliance that needs to be tapped into. And so having these sort of cross-disciplinary fora where you can talk about nature and we can talk about humans in a parallel sense and why care matters in both of these instances, I think is really important for opening that dialogue. I will do everything I can. I like to talk about this. I think it's fantastic. I think it's certainly opened my eyes, and I have flown the flag quite hard. And actually even had some discussions with some financial actors who are more in the sort of traditional sense. So I think that these discussions, I think people are open. I think you have to persevere. And yeah, I don't know, just keep trying. But I think that the nature space, the climate space, is a good space to create momentum, because we're trying to do this. And I think by us acting together, we have a bigger community and create a bit of a groundswell. Thank you.
I'm glad Lebogang said the word capitalism, because she opened the door for me to be controversial in front of my boss, because I do think that is the elephant in the room, right? Like, is it possible for us to have a climate just world within the realm of capitalism in this current economic system? Personally, I don't think so. And so we need a revolution. But you know, the reason why we don't value care and nature is because this is an inherently extractive system that we need to really start thinking about dismantling. And it's also the reason why we have fiscal austerity, fiscal consolidation, because that is what, you know, its core values, right? It's profit over literally everything, including human life. And so I basically only have more questions for us, which is like, can we do this within capitalism and a capitalist economic system? And I think we need to be very honest with ourselves about, yeah, how we would navigate that revolution together. Thanks.
Okay, I think we should move towards Erin kind of closing, but I just wanted to say a few things. One is to really acknowledge the role of three kind of incredible IDRC kind of supporters of this work. So besides the work that we're doing, and I also mentioned some work that UNRIST kind of in a group called Avena kind of are doing around these issues. We've been lucky to be a part of that group, and that lots of this work is being supported by the IDRC, kind of including by the incredible Carolina Rubino, who's here. So Carolina's really kind of had the foresight to see the importance of this work and to support it. Kind of her colleague at the IDRC, who's worked most closely with us, is Martha Mulaisi, and Martha isn't able to be here with us with us today because she's doing some care work. So one of the colleagues from the IDRC is ill, and kind of someone had to do the care work to kind of ensure that she was okay. So I really want to just acknowledge Martha's role in all of this work as well. So kind of a clap for Martha. So come to close, I want to then pass the floor on to Erin Tansey, and her kind of program in the IDRC has been kind of really crucial to this work. So kind of over to you, Erin.
What an incredible group. I'm trying to take pictures of this amazing picture. It's incredible. And Martha, who is not here with us, did people show up? Are they here? So I was able to say yes, absolutely. So yeah, I also feel like I could talk for about a good hour and a half, especially after listening to this absolutely fascinating and stimulating group of amazing women, Lebo, Anna, Chevonne, and Sonia. Really amazing work. And of course, at the foundation is this framework that Sonia had, 6 seconds to explain. If I could just give one little background maybe to, in a sense, why did this show up and why is this here from IDRC's perspective? So, with Carolina and many others in the room, we've been seeing this linkage, right, between the care crisis and the climate crisis and so on. We work with researchers, academics, etc. And as many of you know, especially those of you who are academics, you often stay in your own faculty. You stay in your own domain, and you don't necessarily talk to each other unless there's some extraordinary pulling you together for some reason, right? And what we wanted to try and help do was build the academic foundations for this interlinkage between those two domains, so that nobody in the climate space could say, because we'd been hearing them say, no, this is all, not this is made up, but this is not important. And the same thing from the care side is yeah, but we've really just got to focus on our issues. We just can't do that because it's so limiting, as you've heard so beautifully and eloquently today. So I just wanted to point that out. So then we've already been working with the Southern Center for Inequality Studies and speaking to them. So they agreed to take on board this incredible challenge of developing a framework. So I just think that this framework itself, I think if we look back in a decade, everybody's going to go, wow, kind of like this is where it sort of started from the academic point of view. And why do I say academia? Because all of this week, including on Friday, we were with a group of our partners and grantees who are researchers from all across Africa. And each and every single one of them, including policymakers from Kenya and other places, when we are asking them, what's moved, what's changed, where are the places and how have you been able to make change at the policy level? And it comes down to evidence. I mean, not only evidence, of course, a lot of political will, but if there's no evidence to back it up, then the politicians can't take that forward. So we truly believe in the power of evidence, in high quality evidence that is actually grounded in the lived realities of people. And hopefully you'll meet some, we've got one of our partners from a project in Cape Town called Sharing the Mother Load, which was looking at low-income women in sort of informal settlements around Cape Town and looking at the mothers' challenges in their ability to care for their children, their families, and themselves. And they have a beautiful photo voice exhibit in Cape Town. So if any of you are going to Cape Town, please take a look. But anyways, all of that, I just wanted to say, of course, a huge thank you to the Southern Center for Inequality Studies for Wits University, and for the W20 for creating this space for this incredibly important conversation. And I've already thanked the speakers, so thank you so much. Thank you so much again. You know, I'm not going to say too much more, except that, you know, we can't talk about climate justice if it's not care-centered. I think we talked a lot about capitalism here. We're also talking in the ether, or especially around the G20, around the green industrial revolution, especially for Africa. I want us to pay particular attention to that, because that I can see is they're trying to make sure that our investments, our collective investments as governments, etc., are really going to productivity-enhancing sectors that ultimately advance Africa's industrialization objectives, rather than focusing on the socio-political issues. And that just cannot, we just cannot let that happen. We have to, I don't know, sit everybody down together. And what is so amazing about care is that everybody cares and everybody needs care. So it doesn't matter if you're the CEO, the president, anybody, you know, that's our starting point for this conversation. And I think from what I've been able to see myself, it's because it's been so invisible for so many years. We have never stood back and thought about it. Like, I think Lebo was mentioning that, you know, she's a trade unionist and all these things, but she actually never stopped and thought, hey, wait a minute. You know, this is something that I have to deal with every single day, but I never even thought to talk about it because it's just what we do. So anyways, I'm so energized by today and by what's going to come in these next couple of days. Since about 2018, IDRC has really worked hard to position care at the heart of the G20 and its processes. So from Indonesia, there was the Bali Care Dialogues, and then we were in India, and then most recently in Brazil, and now here in South Africa. So, and our role has been to help bring together different actors, I think. Of course, you're all doing the work. We're just helping to sometimes bring you together and share knowledge and contacts and etc. And really elevate care as a public good and as a foundation for economic justice, for decent work, and for climate resilience. And you know, what better place than here in South Africa? As Imraan said, I spent almost 20 years of my life living and working here. I have a South African husband and 2 South African children, so I do feel very much at home here, and I feel so proud to be here as at the G20 with the incredibly beautiful goals that have been set out by President Ramaphosa. But finally, I guess I want to say that, you know, moving from recognition to transformation, I think we're going to have to continue to work to address this critical gap. Climate finance must be mobilized to finance care. So, you know, mainstreaming mainstream climate finance mechanisms like the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the Fund for Loss and Damage, although it's not going very far anyway, but they've so far not done a good job at, or in fact even failed at recognizing care. And this needs to change, and I'm sure that all of you in this room will, in your own networks and in the ways that you can, will continue to bring this issue up. Because we need reforms that frame care as resilient infrastructure, and we need to be able to create dedicated funding windows for care and include care-sensitive indicators in climate finance monitoring, and ensure that care actors, especially women and frontline caregivers, are part of climate governance and decision-making. And to be able to get there, we need rigorous evidence, as I've said. So, I wanted to also just mention the Global Alliance for Care, but also Avina and other partners. We even are working with partners in Asia and the Pacific on this issue. So I just wanted to shout out to everyone who's made this journey so far, this first sort of big step. Because of the, a fundamental relevance of this work, I am really pleased to announce that IDRC is expanding its investment in the Care Climate Nexus. and we're about to launch 4 new regional research hubs in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and in Asia. And yeah, that's good. And with the aim to generate applied evidence, support local solutions, and inform global policy. And these hubs will build on this conceptual framework. It's in every single one of the hubs as one of their foundations. And what we don't want is, organizations to start afresh without, this is here. So please socialize it as much as you can so that poor Sonia doesn't, Sonia somewhere else doesn't have to, break their brains for 2 years. There's so much depth to this. So that's what I would ask of you. So let me just close by saying that climate resilience is not only about upgrading roads, bridges, or so that they withstand extreme weather or energy grids or early warning systems. It's about the people who hold communities together when systems fail. Caring and climate action must be funded. So thank you so much for your commitment, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
So before closing, I just want to acknowledge a few people who made it possible for us to have this afternoon. Firstly, Julia Taylor. So Julia's a co-author on much of this work with me and Sonia. So and it did a fair amount of the organizing. Thank you, Julia. Not only did Sonia have to prepare the slides, but she was also instrumental in us being able to have this afternoon together. Thank you for your work on that, Sonia. Thokozile from the center has worked with us closely on on this project. So thanks for all of your team. And last but not least, Rahul Gandhi really did all of the legwork to make this afternoon possible. So thanks for that. So these outlines are all at the back there. Please do help yourselves to them. There's much more on this on our website and on the websites of the IDRC and Avina, and UNRIST, and really look out for the work that's going to come to really provide the hard evidence on this, but also some of the solutions in the policy space itself. So thanks to the IDRC for getting this work started, and we're really looking forward to the work from the four global centers. So with that, let me then pass it back to Narnia, and thank you so much, Narnia, for that. Thank you also to Vicky, who really helped us with all of the organizing and to helped us to design the program. So thanks for your support, Vicky.
Thank you, Imraan. Thank you to the panel. That was a really good start. Really great side events. I also want to thank members of the W20 team who've been working incredibly hard on our own recommendations, as well as the organization of this event. The co-chairs of our Care Economy task team, Victoria Duncan and Chelsea Anderson, as well as the incredible work done by Kelsey Harris, who's phenomenal. So we have loads and loads of evidence, and we have many people in this room, some of whom are capitalists. So, so hopefully we are making the inroads that we need to. Thanks, everyone.